I am the moderator for the show, Trevor, and the guests of honor, the anchors of Fuzzy Lawgic. We have Elsie, the dancer Escobar, and Gordon, the podcast lawyer Firemark. Oh no, he's dancing, the dancing lawyer Firemark. Welcome. Good morning. How y'all doing?
Oh, pretty good, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's an exciting day.
Yes, it is. Bree, roll that intro if you would, please. Bree Campano in the back on the deck. I haven't seen the new one yet. That's cool. Oh, it's so exciting. It's so neat. It came so far from a concept in my brain that was originally Elsie. I don't know if you know the original name that I proposed for this show, but do you remember, Gordon?
Mm-mm.
You don't remember? I had
No, I
proposed
don't remember.
Barely Legal Businesses.
Oh, right. And then I said, oh, yeah, but there's that magazine.
My, how far we've come. Here we talk about the legal, social, and ethical implications of the things that are affecting social media creators and creators of all types, because most of that stuff overlaps, as well as the entertainment industry, podcasters, YouTubers. Those things are flying at us so fast. So we thought this might be a time, instead of just complaining about the conversations, is to be a part of the conversations. It's not that we're right. It's not that we're wrong. Most of the time, it is more so to foster a conversation so we can say, let's look at this from more than just the legal aspect, right? Because we understand legal, it's black and white sometimes, and Gordon is here to help us with that. We have the social implications of, are we going to get canceled, which is something we all, I think, fear and wonder about and don't fully understand. And then we have, I think, an additional layer that maybe has gotten lost, at least in the past 20, 30, 40 years, maybe, which is the ethical, like what, okay, so it's socially acceptable or not, it's legally acceptable or not. How does it feel to my personal value system? The ethical piece of it, is it right or is it wrong? Is it paper, is it plastic? And those are the things that I think are going to be really exciting for our industry to dive into, because you all represent the podcast industry. And I think the podcast industry does a wonderful job of maintaining and upholding ethics and community. And that is why I think it's such a really, really cool place to start from. Elsie, Gordon, question one is a softball. When did you start in your, I guess, your media journey, in your podcasting journey? What was the first time you were saying things in front of people where there was a risk of it going wrong in front of more than just your parents and your friends?
You want to take it first, Elsie, or should I?
I'll go real quick because I started in 2006 and mid-July 2006. End of July 2006, and I was recording my public yoga classes. So I don't think that I would be saying too many things within a yoga class that might be problematic and get me in trouble. Although, folks would, it was just really just about communication instead of understanding the differences between going like, just go like this versus saying, extend your arms out to the sides and make sure that your fingertips are really long, right? So then I had to be very descriptive in my language so that I could get that across. So at that time, I did not in any way, shape, or form worry about what you just mentioned.
That's the beauty. How about you, Gordon?
Well, I got started in theatrical production and media stuff very early in my like junior high age, and I was always a behind the scenes guy. So putting myself out in front of cameras, in front of the spotlight, as it were, that came, I guess, after I started practicing law. So I needed to market my firm. I needed to market myself. So I started blogging right around the time when blogging was getting started, and they didn't even call it a blog. It was just a database backed website. So that's probably around 1998 or thereabouts. And so, as a lawyer, when you start putting things out on the web, of course, other lawyers start taking shots at you. You shouldn't be so public about things. It's undignified, those kinds of messages. And then when podcasting started up, and we were earlier today, we were talking about Leo Laporte and his crew of I won't call them misfits, but you know what I mean. I got started podcasting pretty early on. I think it was around 2005 or 6 is when I was invited as a guest on shows. So I started, talking about not necessarily controversial issues, but the legal stuff, answering questions, and when you do that, you're not always answering the way people want the answer to go. So, but then taking a stand on real issues and being more proactively vocal, I guess you could say. That's probably the last 10 years, maybe. So here it is.
Well, that's it's cool. So I knew you both were like integral early on in podcasting, and I wondered about the blog piece because Gordon, you and I have a mutual friend, Meredith, and I know she and her siblings were all actually kind of early on in blogging, which was, it seems like almost the pre-podcasters. Would you both say that people that were blogging were some of the first podcasters? Because I would take a random guess that maybe that was like an easier transition for people.
I'm not sure that I would say that. I started blogging because I wanted to podcast, and I actually did not understand blogs when I heard about blogs. I didn't quite understand what they were about, because it for me was like, why would you want to write things on the internet to just put it out? I didn't for whatever reason, I couldn't wrap my head around that. But when I started to listen to podcasts, I realized they were going, go to the show notes. And then I would go, what are the show notes? And I would go to their blog, and I realized, I see. It's this place where you can send people to learn more about X subject. And it has all of these other pieces like the player and links. Links to me were like essential to learning, which is how I stepped into podcasting. And so then I went, I need to have one of these things. Now I get the blog. I'm going to start a WordPress website because it's free, and I can just start doing that. And that's what these other podcasters are doing. That I want to copy that. And so I started with a blog first, and then, but with my site set on creating a podcast.
Thank you for sharing that. That's interesting, because it's the creation within the creation within the creation, and the evolution of the independent creator really is something that crosses my mind. It never, of course, did until I was in the industry and started listening to industry podcasts and shows and being interested more in what the industry of podcasting was, more so than like what made a successful show. Like that didn't really pique my interest. But what is fascinating about what you both said with blogging is blogging was a big deal at the time, right? And now we might look at it and say it's very similar to being an author. Like anybody can be an author now. You can self-publish. You can, like, it's very easy to be a published author now. Like that's just the name of the game. The internet and blogging were kind of like an iteration of the independent creator that then became the podcaster, which is the independent radio artist, which is something I was kind of thinking about this morning. And it's just fascinating how like history has almost repeated itself, but like almost democratizing the whole communication channel.
Exactly. I've often said that the tools that made blogging easy, it was hard at first. You had to hard code things and whatever, but once it got easy, it was a real leveling of the playing field. You no longer did you need to have a Gutenberg press in order to publish a book. It's really, that's the equivalent, I think. And now anybody who has something to say and a couple of bucks on a computer can publish their message. Now that's still not an entirely level playing field, because not everybody has that couple of bucks on a computer, but we're so much closer to every person has access to not just consuming media, but creating it if so inclined. And that is a wonderful, I'm all about free speech, and I think this is really a wonderful way that more of us can give voice to our thoughts and share and get the discussion going for all the good and bad that represents. So
I think it means a revolution for journalism. I think that because of what you just said, and like because of that, I think journalism is in like this really cool bubble. I'd be curious on Elsie's take too, because you from like with ShePodcasts have such a niche with a broad audience of like where you were playing in the field of doing cool stuff before anybody recognized it as cool when it came to what ShePodcast represents. I think you were ahead of the curve in what people now do because it's a smart business move. You all just did.
What a bunch of geeks we are for calling that stuff cool. But
I know, right? Exactly.
Well, I think it's interesting because it gives voice to so many people, and I think that it could mean a lot. Like that's why the ethical piece was so fascinating to me, because I think for the first time the ethics and morals of regular people actually have a place in journalism, in music, in broadcast media more generally. Do you have any thoughts on like where you've seen that evolve from since you got involved with the collective piece early? Because the collective piece is something that really separates what I see, what you've done in the industry.
So I think about this a lot. I teach a course on media ethics, and so I'm thinking about this a lot, and I'm sort of in the direction that, you know, with this amazing tool, this level playing field now, everybody who is doing this stuff is at least potentially a journalist, or should start to think of themselves as wearing that journalistic hat sometimes. I was talking to a student of mine who's an influencer, and I asked her, hey, are you a journalist? And she says, well, you know, I show off the dress I'm wearing or the jewelry I'm wearing. And I said, so you didn't go and march in that women's march? Oh, yeah, actually I did. And I had my live stream going at the whole time. Okay, well, isn't that journalism, right? And so when you are doing something that can look to the consumer like journalism, I think you have, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, as the famous Spider-Man says. There's the geek coming out again. You know, we have to learn some journalism and journalistic ethics and strategies if we're going to do this and do it well. And that's where the ethics come in, and that's where having a broad perspective and a cultural orientation is important.
I agree with Gordon, and I think that the reason that I decided, or I wanted to kind of have these conversations and really step into this project, is primarily because of that ethical piece. I've seen the industry, the media creator, the new media, which is what we used to call it back in the day too, shift to such a degree that I'm astounded by it. It used to come from a place of let's all do this fun thing together, and because of the lots of changes within social media as well, because that's a huge component to
Yeah.
being able to create the audience, right? It's the reach. We didn't have the instantaneous reach and the virality of some platforms that now have that attached to it. And also, I'm not commenting this on a political way, but in 2016, tweets became news for the very first time, where
100%.
you were getting quotes off of a tweet, which was not something that ever happened before, right?
You mean major media reporting on what so-and-so tweeted?
Correct. As the thing, as news that had implications in real world scenarios, both in terms of safety, both in terms of income loss, job losses, companies losses. There's so much implication that started to happen within social that it kind of shifted our ability to have that, at least for me anyway, have the nonchalant way of getting behind the microphone and just saying things and then tweeting this stuff without checking yourself as to what Gordon was talking about, which is your responsibility to create something, create action in the world, in real life, and have an impact for good or bad. And so you never know how things are going to be construed, and also the responses that you're going to get. There's always, at least right now, what I hear a lot of, and we have to check ourselves all the time in the sense like, my intention was not to harm. Unfortunately, you created you harmed. Whether your intention was to do it or not, it really is not, it does not bear in our world now. So we've got to recognize that intention does not equate you have an excuse for it. So we have to get an opportunity to really check ourselves and say, like, in what way are we adding to the conversation in the world?
Totally agree. And it's interesting to talk about the intention not to harm. There are some situations where, hey, as you said, yeah, but the harm happened.
Right.
And so some of the ethical moral component is also, what do you do after that happens to take responsibility for it, rather than deflecting or what's common nowadays. Well, too bad you're hurt, your feelings got hurt. Calling people names and things like that is not an ethical moral approach to this, I think. Anyway, go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, it's just, well, to your point, like the double down part, it's like people feel like they either have to, it seems that there's a confusion with passive and aggressive, and that you have to choose one of those paths in response to a mistake you've made, or a mistake that someone else has made, for that matter. It's like, nah, it's like people do make mistakes, and owning it, Elsie, like you're saying, is obviously, like, you can't even, you're going to wake up tomorrow. In most scenarios, you're going to wake up tomorrow. We're all going to wake up tomorrow if we're lucky. And so in the version where we wake up tomorrow, what can we do to improve the situation, rather than what can we do to continue going down a path that feels so uncomfortable for both sides of that argument, probably? Because I don't think that probably that if you find yourself in an extreme on any side of any discussion, that you don't also have like a boatload of nerves going on in you, and a boatload of insecurities, and a boatload of concern about what's next. And it just seems like a good question is, what can I do to improve the situation from here, whatever that means? Like, let's just move away from this. And sometimes that's listening. And that's why I think so highly of what, not to belabor the point, but so highly of what you have been a part of creating, and what you both have been a part of creating in the industry, which is a platform for more people to use their voice and to get their voice out there, to share their perspective. And you don't have to agree with 100% of what the news anchor says, if you recognize that the news anchor isn't trying to be perfect. Like, it's just a person trying to get through like everyone else. It is just a bizarro world on the ethical piece, which is why it's fuzzy. That's where we got to fuzzy. And that doesn't even include the stuff that we're actually told is black and white. Like the social, we sort of rubbed up against the social implications of what happens is sometimes we do get totally shut down, or we totally are stilted up. And it seems like there's a confusion that you can operate in the gray area and be imperfect and still make a way for yourself. And then from a legal side, whole different discussion, but like, there are a lot of laws. That's one thing I've learned as an entrepreneur in the past year and a half, is that I have come to realize that there are so many, before you even get to social norms, the amount of legal things that say that they guide us, and that could put us behind bars, or could put us behind on our bills significantly, or could ruin our brand, if you want to put it that way. Like, the amount of things that actually could come and get us in the real world is nuts. And the difference is the keyboard warriors don't have to abide by like hate speech laws. And I think that's one of the interesting pieces that I get very confused about, I guess, to just as a general topic, is why is it that like a hate speech law, or a verbal abuse, or a threat to kill someone, why does that not hold the same weight on the internet as it does if I were to say it to you in person? Like, I could be arrested for saying I'm going to assault you if I said it in live air, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can get into all the legal definitions of when does it cross the line into hate speech or incitement, or those kinds of things.
It's wild, though.
This is stuff we're really struggling with as a culture right now in America, especially with our freedom of speech, First Amendment being such a powerful thing. People say things that, as you said, in other forums would have been, either criminal or would have brought on a lot of consternation. And here it's just, it just flies by and everybody has to shrug and accept it. There's a lot to that. But
I think that level of is one the other reason that I want to have these conversations as well, primarily for and really guiding my children, right? So there are these little beings now. They're coming into themselves. Mine are in the tween teen area, and they are now forced to be in a world, both digitally and in real life, that no one else in history has experienced living in. And as a parent, there are situations that I will never have the experience that they have. I have my own, and I'm kind of straddling. Obviously, I know how to use tech, and I am up to date in a lot of the social media things, but they move so fast. They are native to this world that most of us that are alive right now are not part of or have not experienced in the same way. And so we are in a situation now where we are meant to behave online in ways that nobody, like you were just mentioning, in real life, we wouldn't behave that way. If there was these kind of back and forth communications inside of a party, let's say, or a gathering, there are social norms that we all have essentially said yes to. And so there are some ways of behavior that immediately would either get you thrown out of the house, or people would go like, hey, come on, let's de-escalate this thing, let's go to this part, or let's keep your voice down, don't scream so loud. Like, there's all kinds of ways in which we can communicate, whereas now it's all that, and nobody has said this is appropriate, this is not appropriate. So there's such a weird layer into that, where the humanity seems to have been sort of taken out of it, and now we're forced to behave in another I'm using this word from a different term, but like another dimension. It's like a different part of ourselves. It's not our whole self. It's the digital self. It's the when I type self.
That hits the nail on the head of something that I'm so grateful at. Like, I'll shout her out probably too much, but the best boss I ever worked for, Corey Roan of Milestone Pediatric Therapy, shameless plug. She was like so good at writing those lines and teaching, really taught me, because she gave me those opportunities, and then we gave those to our staff as we grew, is to recognize the whole person. Like, she was the owner of a company, but she was also a mom. And in addition to that, she's a daughter. In addition to that, she's a sister. And like, there's all these different elements and a friend. And she has other business owners that are her friends. And it was those experiences that really helped me see that you could do both, that you can treat a person as a whole person. You can thin your margins out a little bit and treat people well. Yeah. And you can have that work. And I think terms that's used all the time. Go ahead, Gordon, on the whole person.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, you're talking about the human side of everything we're doing, and that's a pretty good transition into our topic for today. But before we go there, I just wanted to point out the pace of technology and development and really disruption is faster and faster and faster. And we've gotten to the point where, look, in the 50s, the railroads were the disruptive thing that made the country smaller, essentially, very quickly. Now we had a disruption last week, and what's this week's disruption? And it's one wave coming after the next and after the next. But I think right now, the big tsunamis we're all talking about and afraid about is this topic we're going to get into, artificial intelligence. So what do you say? And I just, before we go there, I want to acknowledge the comments. We've got Amy and Wahib and a handful of other people making great comments and remarks, and we'll try to address some of them. And we are seeing them. Thank you. But we're gonna cover our topics and we'll get to some questions and responses a little later on in the show. So
Wahib is 100% into it, which is awesome. Like, he's got some real hot takes on it, so I'm excited to read those comments and be able to feature some of those as we go through. There's Meredith. What up, Meredith? That's so cool. I feel like famous people are watching. My cousin Meredith, the dog. I feel like it's the most endearing to have family spend time in an area like this, because it's our professional world. It's not somewhere we often get to share with our family unless we're podcasters, for instance, or videographers. But yeah, the AI thing is fun. It's new to most people. And true story, just a really quick backstory. this idea, this concept, this conversation that we're starting today and that we're about to like dip our toes into, the seed for the idea, the seed for it being a problem for me, and I want to give credit where it's due, came when I was in grad school. And we had to write a paper on what we thought would destroy creativity. Well, no, that's not true. We had a whole list of topics that we could pick from. And of course, I picked that one because my department was creative studies. So I picked the one that I thought would be the most prodding, I guess. And what I realized, this would have been in like 2014 or 15. And I chose Pinterest because as I researched it, I got really existential in a hurry. Like I went from picking a topic that I thought would be incendiary, because apparently that's what I do sometimes. And I quickly learned that the world of artificial intelligence was the first I'd been exposed to it. I was reading about futurists. It was like a whole category of professional, Ray Kurzweil, like what Google was doing, what Boston Dynamics was doing. So it blossomed from, I think Pinterest will ruin creativity, to I think artificial intelligence will ruin humanity if we don't watch ourselves. Because I just like it. It could teach itself. The concept of AI that's different from a smartphone or a computer in the way that we think about it like day to day for the last 15 years of technology is that it couldn't teach itself. Now we can have it teach itself, have it write itself. We can then overdub it automatically with a voice that sounds human, like our Maps does, like Siri does. We could theoretically produce an entire series of novels and then publish it as a movie set and almost have it entirely workflowed with Zap, like with Zapier. So it just interconnected and produced itself. And I think that for the creator industry, which we hope to serve and are a part of, is very like, they're either all in because they can't scale themselves and so they're pumped about the tech, or there's this other side, I think, where it's me, where I've invested my professional life into my creative skill set. And it concerns me how it gets used. So jumping right into the AI, how do you both feel from a professional and personal standpoint on this thing that we are now talking about every day?
I think we should really just quickly frame the conversation in terms of what AI is and what we're talking about right now. It's been big news, but someone could see this a few months or years from now and not know, well, which ones are they talking about. So, AI is this idea of machines that or software that can think and act at least a little bit to the outside world, appearing to be human in its tone and things, and to do tasks that normally or historically have required human intelligence and intervention. And it's in the visual arts arena. Speech, as you said, you can have AI created speech or translations. It can be used to create computer code. It can be making decision making and problem solving and all of that. And it really originated in the late 40s, early 50s. Alan Turing was the guy who sort of conceived of the idea, and then a little later on, the mathematicians really got involved and started articulating how it might work. But you mentioned futurists a second ago. Let's be real. The original futurists were guys like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov and L. Ron Hubbard, the science fiction writers, for whatever they went on to do. But they were the ones that came up with some of these ideas. And if you look at some of that early science fiction and you look at what's happening today, these guys were predicting the future. And so the role of AI has always started or found its footing in media. And we'll talk a little more about that. But Elsie, why don't you take really Trevor's real question, which is what do you think about it?
Yeah,
well, that's great perspective.
It's in terms of like I think that as you framed it, that whole AI idea and the science fiction creators, those big thinkers, they all were around the artistry, the artistry of humanity, their ability to kind of move back and forth from the present time to the future times and dream big and be open. And I think really in the sense of allowing their brains expand to become all of these things. And right now, what we are seeing, at least in the way that we're talking about AI, is how that is affecting our tangible everyday lives. And I'm not feeling it There's two sides of it. One of it that I can see the AI aspect of it expanding my ability to, like, one way that I saw it when I was taking notes and preparing for this was I can see a huge benefit of with AI to take over tasks that will help me be more present in my life, because these are usually taking so much more extra time, so I can be present and do great things with my family, myself, and all kinds of stuff. I see that really, really well. The other side that I'm not too keen on so much is that it feels as if instead of having that expansive quality of dreaming into a world, it is kind of making me feel more narrow, as if in, like, it's just creating much more restrictions, and this feels weird. It's like a dissonance. I don't want to engage in it because it's scary and it's different, and it doesn't make me feel free, because it makes me feel like something else can do me, and that's weird. So I'm seeing it from both sides of it. But I feel the creative aspect of AI is what shines, and there are other aspects of it that are, I feel, scary.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's like any tool, and as new tools have come into use, that there's always the value proposition of using the tool, and then, you know, if it's misused or carelessly used, it can be
Yep.
very dangerous. Think a chainsaw makes it super easy to cut down trees, but if you don't use it properly, someone's getting hurt or
Yep.
killed, right? Same is true with some of the digital technologies that have come before. You know, I mean, if you look at early um, imaging software, Photoshop, for example, you know, photographers and artists were concerned about Photoshop when it came out for the reason that, hey, it could be misused. You could retouch images in ways that were very different. And in marketing and media, we've seen people talking about how the model is made to look even skinnier on the magazine cover, and that has a social impact on young girls who are thinking that's the ideal. I have to look that way, or I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, or whatever. So anytime a new technology, a new tool comes into play, we need to look at it through a lot of different lenses, and that's really what we're here to do with Fuzzy Lawgic. And I'm just excited about that. But on the AI front, particularly, there are all of these worries about, you know, how do we use these tools well to serve society, to serve us, but also how do we make sure that they don't disserve us or cause harm. And one of the big problems with AI that a lot of the science fiction authors I was referring to earlier was in those dystopian stories was, what happens when the AI gets smart enough to decide for itself whether it's doing right or not.
Yep.
And you know, at some point, does the AI start ignoring human input,
or thinking it can do it better, or thinking it can do more
right?
perfect. But the interconnectivity of the internet is really what makes the dynamic so funky, because we have fully automated facilities, and Amazon and Jeff Bezos have a fully automated warehouse. So, like, if the fully automated manufacturing facility receives a notification from a fully automated company somewhere, then they could potentially fulfill its own entire workflow all by itself.
Well, and
And it's
imagine
like,
this:
we're gonna
imagine that you order some product, and the AI decides that's not what you need. We'll send them this instead. You know,
yeah.
I mean, that's a relatively benign example of something, but yeah, as Mr. Jesse's saying, iRobot, and it's very, yeah, Amy's right. It's conflicting. The idea is good. We're new to being creative, and look, it is an amazing creative tool, but it also has a lot of implications, and I think, you know, that's what we're here for. Let's have these conversations and be open-minded about where we go, and
Yeah.
you know,
And how we can protect ourselves.
What's that?
And how we can protect ourselves with it and from it, and like, where do we fall within? Is this is obviously where we're at, but also an interesting question that I struggle with a lot as a creative, and is now a facilitator for creators. Where does the information come from? Is it the person who, like, now when somebody sends me something, if it's not their face, I definitely want to know if it was them or if it was a collaboration effort.
Yeah.
But does that even have a legal grounding now to be a trademark infringement if it pulls from my Wikipedia page, or if it pulls from my song, if it pulls from my original production and then copy pastes it into somebody's email for their chat GPT or whatever. Is that trademark infringement or IP issues?
It may be intellectual property. It could also be personal privacy related stuff, like using a person's name or likeness or the sound of their voice without their consent. There are cases going back 30, 40, maybe more years dealing with celebrities there's one case where Bette Midler, famous singer, had a very famous song, "Do You Want to Dance?" She didn't write the song, so she didn't have control over how the composition was used. But her recording of that was iconic, and it was her signature song at the time. Well, Ford Motor Company wanted to use her recording in one of their ads, and she said no. So they went and they got someone to sing a sound-alike recording of that same song, published it, made the ad, and she sued. And here in California, she won under what's called a right of publicity, which is this idea of a unlawful commercial use, unauthorized commercial use of somebody's identifying characteristics. And that doesn't exist exactly the same way everywhere, but in places where it does, that can be a real concern. If the AI is generating it, if I say, hey, go, make me a song that sounds like Bette Midler singing, and then you use it in an improper way, then there's definitely some legal consequence to that. On the copyright front, the lawsuits have only just begun. It's too soon to say how this is going to shake out, but it's mainly happening in the image side of this, where the tools like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and Midfusion, I think, is another one. They are being sued now by the creators of images. There's a class action by some artists. Getty Images is suing one of them as well, claiming that when the systems ingested all this data, all these images and keyword pairs in order to learn, that was a copying in violation of copyright law. Even if it isn't a copyright issue, there's other contract issues, because when you put up a website, you put up terms of service, and people come and use that, and it becomes a contract with your users. So if someone comes in and uses the stuff on your site for purposes that go beyond the scope of what you've authorized, then are they in breach of contract? Or is that actually just trying to make something like a copyright law, to fit a square peg in a round hole kind of a situation? So these are the things that courts are really going to have to grapple with in the next few years. And like I said, the lawsuits, I think it's too soon for even the defendants to have had to answer the initial complaints in these lawsuits. So we're going to be watching this closely and looking forward to some outcomes. Actually, one of the big legal issues that comes up here is this concept of fair use that everybody has heard, and people throw the term around a lot, and very few people actually understand what fair use is. And there's a case in front of the Supreme Court right now. They had the hearings back in November, December. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to give us some guidance on what is transformative use and where the boundaries are for that. That's the Andy Warhol Foundation versus Lynn Goldsmith case that you'll be hearing about in the next few months for sure. So lots and lots of legal machinations going on. A little too soon to have real answers to most of it.
I'm really curious about that, Gordon, because what if, talking about the same thing, let's say you go into, chat GPT and you ask it a question and it writes a thing for you, you use the thing, you don't know it's somebody else's thing, and you publish it, but you don't know because there's no attribution. There's no way to... So who's that? Like, where does that line fall? I'm not asking you to answer that question specifically, but you see what I'm getting at, where it's, I'll put it on my blog. I don't know. I really honestly do not know it was yours. Like, I would not have used it if it was your thing. I totally, I would have given you attribution if I knew it, but it was spit out to me as if it wasn't.
Right. So you hear the word diffusion being used in these descriptions of these tools. The idea is the software is programmed in a way that it will diffuse it and not make it a direct, exact or very similar copy of the original thing. And so you're probably not likely to see an exact match kind of a thing. Although there's a scenario where you give the query enough detail about what you're looking for. Write me a this in the style of that about such and such, using the words this, this, and this, and keywords XYZ. It's, there may only be one or two sources out there on the internet that have that, that match up with those things. And so what you're going to get is going to be very similar. And in copyright law, the fundamental test is, was there copying? Are they substantially similar? Or was there some transformation?
Yeah, there's I have a question for you, Gordon, that I had never heard about this term before in terms of like the legalities from that article that I shared with you all. If you guys can put it in the chat there, written by Yuri Gal. And it's this concept about contextual integrity. So this is a direct quote from this article that they'll post in the chat here, and it says, quote, even when the data is publicly available, its use can breach what we call contextual integrity. This is a fundamental principle in legal discussions of privacy. It requires that individuals' information is not revealed outside of the context in which it was originally produced, end quote, which is something that I don't know what that was, but it does make sense. And in the fact that when it comes to like legal things, like one of the things that I've been working on some contracts and agreements and, stuff like that, daily work. And you would think like, oh my gosh, I would like to have Chat GPT take a look at this, or take the legalese out of it a little bit, or catch some grammar errors, or I don't know, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that's being parsed and being added into a possible context that I don't want it to be out there, and it can just now be used minus the context around it. Now, before I'm going to wrap this up here in just a moment here, as I wrap to do this, in the fact that that's what's happening on social and with on TikTok videos, and with this, somebody can take a little bit of what I'm saying right now and use it outside of its context, and I can get in trouble, or it could, it's happening all the time. So this just feels like it's even more of that. Yes.
You're absolutely right, and these are the questions we really struggle with, and the question on the screen right now. I'm gonna just take the transition. Who owns the rights to AI generated art? And I want to address that. Wahib has expressed some points of view, and I think even called me out for being incorrect about something, or someone saying that there's ownership. It's not about the users, Wahib. It's the makers of these tools that are being sued for the ingestion itself, which is a copy, at least arguably a copying of the data. There is some dispute about whether they actually copied it, or whether the ingestion was really just a look at it and interpret it kind of an ingestion. So there's that. And your articulation of what is a derivative work that has 100% undeniable link between the previously registered copyright. No, first of all, there's no legal requirement of a registered copyright, and there does not need to be a pre-existing license between the original artist and the generative AI. The owner of a copyright has the right to control whether or not something is used without their permission. Except if this is all U.S. law, except if it is under this fair use exception or defense, or if there's another exception that applies. It's not about the legal agreement between the AI artist and the accusing artist. And in fact, calling the AI artist is something that's being called into question. In fact, yes, you're right that the AI artist is the owner of the generated art. The fact of it is, the U.S. copyright law has said no, and the Copyright Office has said no to non-human created art. And there is a case going on right now dealing with a comic book graphic novel that was entirely generated with AI tools. And the creator acknowledged this in her registration, and they are now reviewing whether or not to cancel that registration. But the Copyright Office has been very clear in the past in determining, and the courts have agreed, that it has to be a human author in order to be entitled to copyright protection. So yes, the contract between ChatGPT and the person giving it the prompt says you own what's created when you give us a prompt. Yes, you own it, but only insofar as the relationship between ChatGPT and that person. From a copyright standpoint, you don't own it because there's no copyright to own. It's not property. It's just out there. And that is an interesting struggle that we as a society are going to have to deal with now when there's all this new, what would looks like intellectual property, but according to at least U.S. law for now, isn't. And so the U.S. copyright law is all about the incentivizing creation by reserving certain rights for authors so they can monetize. And then, the counter to that is that we do it for a limited time. That's why copyrights expire. So,
Right.
But if no copyright ever comes into existence, then are people going to be incentivized to do this stuff and make new things? And if it's possible to just lift stuff from other people who have created stuff themselves, human authorship, where does that incentive go if these AIs can just rip it off? Rip it off is a pejorative way of saying it, but you know what I mean. So lots and lots of weird legal and cultural issues that are coming out of this right now.
It's so fun. I really appreciate you taking us all the way down at least a quick. That was super understandable for me, at least as a business person, at least from that perspective. And my wife is an artist, so I appreciate the way you and I surround myself with people who are creators. And I think that you got all the way to the heart of the issue, which is if you follow the thread far enough, if you choose to, right? Because there's a choice, you don't have to, but if you choose to follow the thread, then I would think, to your point, that ChatGPT, in the same way that Wikipedia has, could have a reference code for where they pull their information from so that it could give credit, because there are, I think, some potentially simple solutions to making the relationship more whole and not making it evil or bad, at least from a creator standpoint. Why couldn't you tie a thread back and just have there be an SEO hit? I might be willing to. Wikipedia has built their whole business model on that, I think.
Yeah.
Wikipedia is an encyclopedia of people's information that then they check and then they cite it. And then if it's not cited, it literally says not cited. And so me as the reader, I now have something to anchor this information that I'm reading in, which is helpful for trademark, but also helpful for who the heck is teaching me this information? Oh, wow.
Yeah. Wow. Well, do you guys want to know if something is AI generated versus human generated? And does that attribution or that byline, is that something that's important to you guys? What do you think? I mean, leaving aside whether legally you have to do it, let's ask just the question.
I'd love to know that from the perspective of I know that the world says that whatever you're thinking, it's already been thought before. There are no new ideas, kind of a thing, right? So I get that.
Yeah.
But there's something to be said that I'd love. I mean, it's something that a lot of folks that are generally historically excluded are often having to deal with. The fact that Black and Indigenous and people of color have come up with ideas, especially in art, that have been usurped by mainstream Western media of all types, whether it's music or visual or fashion in any kind of perspective, and oftentimes are never given attribution, nor there's no historical context to that. It's very, very hard for you to even find the source and to claim that. I would hate for that to continue with AI. I mean, it's just happening all the time. So I would like to know that, because to me, I feel for a lot of folks that are often not heard, the ability to say, I said that, this is mine, is just something that we've often not gotten. So I'm all in for seeing the quote and the receipts.
Yeah. The law has some requirements for, transparency about things, mainly in the commercial arena. It's very hard for the government to step in and tell political speakers or artistic speakers, you must do it this way, or you must not do these things. That's a prior restraint on speech. But when we get into the commercial arena, misleading statements are not allowed. You have to give disclosures. We've seen it in the use of affiliate links and podcasts and blogs, and then you have to tell the audience what's happening. And there's other areas where it's coming in too. But I think that the moral slash ethical thing to do if you are a writer or a creator and you're using AI to help generate the stuff you're putting out to the world. You should acknowledge, I used an AI tool to help me do this, or the outline for this article was created by AI, and then I came in and fixed it. Or that we have to feel our way and find the right way of making those disclosures. Just like just like the kinds of sort of cultural appropriation things you were talking about, Elsie. The law can only go so far, and so we do have to rely on just doing what's right and having the conversation about what's right. Here we are starting that conversation, I hope.
Yeah.
The other side of that cultural bias thing that we're talking about is one of the big risks with AI is is when these tools are being because what they're ingesting is this largely northern white Eurocentric body of stuff. There's going to be bias built into the ingestion, the material that it's based on. So we've seen this in some of the early uses of AI were facial recognition tools that the police were using, and the evidence started to show, the statistics were, it couldn't tell 2 or 3 black men apart, things like that. The same thing is being now. What happens when we start using these AIs to decide who gets a mortgage or what interest rate you get on your mortgage, or do you get the health care treatment that you want because the insurance company is using an AI to decide what's approved and what's not? These are some real challenges.
Those industries been using it, and we see what happens. Just to answer part of that is those industries have had. That's why it's new to us, but it's not new. Like those industries have been using those. Even back to like my early work as a job coach, right? Helping people get jobs. One of the challenges you face is if you don't check all the right algorithm boxes when you apply to a bigger company, you don't even make it to the screening process, let alone to the interview round, because it is excluded you because you don't have access to the same resources that I did, where I had a career center to help me build my resume. It wasn't my words, it was some career center builders. But those things, I think I'm taking a hot take, but to answer your question, we see what those industries have done when they have those tools, which is why it's so damn concerning for creators, because now they've given us the power. I think now that we have AI, we get to be a part of the conversation for probably the first time since it existed 15 or 20 or 30 years ago. So man, they have screwed it up.
Well, I mean, I think that argues both for extreme caution in adopting these tools and using them, but also it argues for further development to improve them and eliminate some of these problems. And that's, I think, really the promise is there if handled correctly. One question we really have to ask is, do we trust ourselves to handle it correctly? And
not by ourselves. I think not by ourselves. I'll say for myself, for looking like I do and checking the demographic boxes that I do when I fill out those things and how I fit in those boxes, I don't trust them. Like that's not without having a more broad group of people involved in the conversation, because then you at least give yourself a chance to build the systems in a way that serves more people when you include more people. Show us the way your algorithm works.
I mean, we have to train ourselves to acknowledge when we are experiencing or using bias in our own decision making. The question is, can we and how do we train the machines to do the same thing? Because until we get there, it isn't really similar enough to human intelligence to acknowledge its own failings and its own shortcomings.
I think right now we're in the inflection point at this point in time is so pivotal because of what you mentioned earlier, Gordon, is the exponential speed in which some of these things are happening, because even the data around GPT being adopted and all the accounts that are open, it's the fastest growing, application that has been downloaded by consumers ever. And this happened like in 2 weeks, right? And so what's happening is the larger organizations, as we know, with Microsoft and with Google, who are just like getting this stuff out, right? We need to get this stuff out. Think about being able to check on what they're doing, right? They have to do it fast. And as you and I know, and I think all of us as creators know, the faster we do things, the more mistakes we make, the more time we stumble. We have to go clean things up. I did that. I wasn't really thinking about it. And for us individually, it can be problematic. But for a company that has that much of an influence in the world, going fast is just not what they need to do. But unfortunately, they're being pushed by money, right? Because they want to make the money. They want to be first. I want to be number one. And unfortunately, that whole thematic system, and was particularly in Western corporate cultures, is what drives it, right? Faster out, faster making the money, and who cares, because we were first. And so that's where I'm afraid. That's where my fear comes in, is in the fact that these tools are going to go out and we are still trying to figure out all the things ourselves. And it's like they don't even know what they're putting out there. They still haven't seen what the issues are, and are seeing we're seeing the problems that are arising already, even just from the presentation, of Bard, was it from Google, that it had already a factual mistake when they just put out that one thing. And it's kind of that's what's concerning to me. A very responsible company who has been working with AI in the back, and they have been able to use OpenAI to create a tool that has been well thought out. They're really putting it through its paces. They're really testing it with their users. They're really taking feedback. I don't know if that's going to happen. So
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The word "open" in this conversation. OpenAI is the name of the company that has created ChatGPT, but the idea is that the data set is open to anybody who wants to use it can use it. I don't think it's even charged a fee for that. That openness is really important, so that all of the computer scientists, all of the data scientists can really look into it and try to identify these biases and these challenges, and hopefully that's how we make it better, and it doesn't just become a cluster of people pointing fingers at what's wrong and who's wrong, and all those kinds of things. So
that brings me to a question that I want to ask. It's pointed, but I think it's pointed in the social direction, so it'll be a little lighter. How do you feel, to each of you, and I want to start with Elsie again, because you have this unique connection, but you both are at conferences, and I think it gives you a very unique perspective on what people are feeling. When we look at this technology that is, broadly speaking, artificial intelligence, using ChatGPT to pick on, because, as Elsie said, that's the hot word of the day. So let's focus on them just as an anchoring point. What kind of technology do you feel like, or tool or resources like this, if it can ride the rails to be close to right, whatever that ends up being, where do you feel like its greatest value is to your communities now, to ShePodcasts, to the people that you serve in the podcast community and the media industry more broadly? What is an iteration, or what is something that you feel like that it can do to help us right now with the way we have it?
I think that one of the biggest pain points that we've seen, particularly from ShePodcasts and the group itself, as well as some of the data that came out from the Indie Pod Census report. I hope I got the name right. There's going to be data coming up in March here that you can reference to through this. But one of the biggest pain points is the fact that outsourcing is what the majority of independent podcasters are looking for help with. And as you know, if you start to outsource your stuff, there's folks that can, create all the audiograms for your podcast and make sure they write the social media tweets. And we have to get the show notes done. And who's going to upload the stuff, right? So all of those little things, I think that I was just looking at some of the implementation for AI that Notion has been putting out. And I think it's phenomenal. I mean, they're doing great. Like that to me is exciting. It feels like it's empowering for creators. I can go in there and really quickly do my show notes. Our team for ShePodcast already uses Notion to use our show notes. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to help Melissa, who is like our operations woman, be able to like get this stuff out faster, because there's just so much that I feel like this is so great. I'm glad that this is there so that we can get things out and really focus on the work, because most of us are running out of time and don't have enough resources to invest in all of the products. But if there's like one thing that can help me, as of right now, ChatGPT is great to be able to do that, because at this point, as we're recording, it's free. You can pay for it, but it's free. And so you get an opportunity to go to do that. That's where I would go with it in terms of outsourcing for us right now.
I just think that, you know, the economic consequences of exactly what you talk about is it could be putting some people out of work. People who,
Correct.
you know, who have been doing this kind of work for those who have the resources, they may find themselves squeezed out. And all I can say is, if you're one of those, learn to be really, really good at operating these AIs, figuring out how to do the
Yep.
queries and things like that, and you will have a place. Because, you know, what the layperson who wants to do a query to accomplish something versus what a professional, just like a Photoshop artist, you know, anybody can get Photoshop and tinker with photos. But if you're really, really good at it, that's when you really
Yep.
can have a career at it or an income. So that's my tip: is we all need to learn about this technology, and those who are possibly going to be displaced really need to get ahead of that curve as soon as possible. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty bullish on the concept. We do need to be watching and careful
Mhm.
about how it gets implemented and how we use it. And I do think that transparency and disclosure is going to be really important, even if it's just having a little bug on the screen or a little disclaimer at the bottom of a blog post or whatever is being written by the machines, just to indicate, you know, AI was involved in making this. Kind of like the gluten-free or you know, we put labels on things that this was made in a facility that also processes nuts, you know.
Right.
We could
And
do the same thing.
Instagram has, hopefully that's what we were wanting, right? Because Instagram has been, I don't know if this is true, having to disclose whether or not you're using a filter or not, because it was being harmful, especially to young girls, right? Because there was that lack of understanding of that's also AI. Right? It's intelligently looking at your face and making your face look completely different. There's so many tools out there to do that, and it is sending a message to our kids. And it's wonderful. And yet at the same time, we do need to have a disclosure that that's what's happening here. So so those are my thoughts on that stuff. In terms of like, I think the concept of our show, right? It's the whole fuzziness. It's the whole whether or not we're in or out kind of a thing here. And I'm thinking about it from the perspective of having it is a little bit fuzzy, but I see it from 2 points of view. Number one is that the ship is sailing. So it's actually, you need to get on it. You need to get on the ship. Like you can't just be like, ooh, so scary, I can't touch it. Because what's going to happen is you're not going to be empowered. And again, coming to my kids, being as mom, that's like front of mind all the time. I need to be in front of this so that I can educate my kids about this. Plus, a lot of people really need to know that have the nuance to be in the rooms to have the difficult conversations. And we can't do that if we just push it away. We got to go in it. We got to use it. We got to learn it. We got to see the problems, but we also have to see what the good stuff is, because we are in a wonderful place right now where we can actually create the path in which this develops if we choose to step into it without that fear mongering thing, right? I want my parents to feel good and confident in using AI tools. I do not want my mom to freak out. I'm like, oh my God, it's like I want her to feel as empowered towards the end of her life, and know that there's something good about it. Also knowing that there's these other negative things, right? Like the weight loss industry. To me, GPT or all the OpenAI stuff feels a lot like the fat loss cure that we're still looking for, where for many years there were the pills, right? Everybody started taking those pills to help you lose weight. What did we find out about those pills? Everybody jumped into it because they just wanted those pills. Then it was the intestinal stuff. I forgot the name, the proper name for this, but
lap band and the bypass surgeries and things like that.
yes, all of that stuff. And we saw that it worked. And then there were these issues, right? And then now there's the whole fat what do you call it? The positivity, all the positivity that comes with the weight loss. And so we're trying to figure out like what all of that is, but that's been decades of trying to figure out how we create a healthy human.
no action is without its consequences. Yeah,
exactly. So we need to step into it and have those conversations to see what's going to happen. And I just don't want us to go through the whole, like, everybody's taking the fat loss pill and then realize we're all, like, addicted to speed.
It's hard, as you said, the ship has set sail.
I mean,
the ship has set sail.
Yeah.
And yet we're still building the ship.
Yeah. Correct.
So that that is, and this pace of iteration, this pace of disruption is really so rapid that what we're doing with this stuff next week is going to be different, and the way we're thinking about it. And so we'll continue having these conversations. You were talking about learning and getting up to speed on how these things work, and I think that information literacy, data literacy, and data hygiene are both really important things that they're being taught a little bit in the schools now. I've got kids, preteen and teen kids, that are learning a little bit about this stuff, and one of them wants to be an engineer, so he's paying a lot of attention. But we need to do better at that level, teaching it to the kids before it starts having tremendous impact on their lives. And some things you can't dial back if it goes the wrong direction. And that's where those are my big realistic fears lie. And then the other fear is when do the machines realize that the humans are the problem and start to exterminate?
No!
I don't know. That is kind of the curiosity, because there is always a wizard behind. That is why we fear what you said, is because we know that there's a wizard behind the curtain. And that curtain, do we trust the person who's behind that curtain, is kind of that question. And I think based on what our friends in the first wave of Silicon Valley, we're still dealing with, I say dealing with, but I think we're still living in the era of that early Silicon Valley vibe that started in the late 80s, early 90s, into the 2000s. Like, those companies are still the ones that are dictating the rules to this game. And I think those are the wizards behind the curtain largely right now. And I think that's the fun question of, do we trust them based on what they've shown us so far?
Yeah. Well, he says no.
It is fuzzy.
Well, he says we have fail safes for that, and Mr. Jesse refers to the Matrix, and I'll just point out that if the fail safes really worked as well as they would, we wouldn't have people data breaches and computer hacking, and we wouldn't have people falling for the tricks where they give up their email address and their bank account number and those kinds of things. So even fail safes, it's not a complete fail safe. And so
to your point, we're all on the ship, and I think it is going to take as many of us that are willing. Obviously not everybody's going to care to the level to ask that second and third and fourth level question and keep the discussions going, and that's okay. We've never existed in a human society where everybody bought into everything. That doesn't exist. That's silly. But for those of us that are interested or do have a platform to do it, I think it's incumbent upon us to at least try to facilitate the conversation with our communities, not pretend we know the answers, not pretend that we represent everybody, but do our best to gauge what's going on in the real world with people's minds and engaging in real life discussions, because the one antidote to AI being wrong is real life discussions, I think. So if AI starts disagreeing with what I hear in real life, then I start to manipulate the AI back, which is a conversation for a different day. But that is the upside of understanding the conversation, and understanding the algorithm is understanding then how to make it work for you. And I really appreciate the fact that you both took a stance on how we can use it today, which is get involved and understand it. Don't let it run your life. Because again, the truth is I don't trust the wizards based on what they've shown us so far.
Yeah, but don't run away scared from it either. We have to engage with it and learn it. Yeah,
that's right. We're here for it. I want to take a few moments. Thank you both for engaging in a really wild discussion. We planned this discussion 6 weeks ago, before ChatGPT even really lit on fire. It was pre-ChatGPT that this was on our radar. And so, pat ourselves on the back for being able to have this moment. It was a pretty fun one, pretty early on, and I'm really stoked about that. I don't know if you could tell, but I was lighting up as you were each talking about the perspectives of how to be a part of it, because to me, that's what's important as creators, is we are creators, and we do get a choice to say yes or no to things, or to say, I have another question, or another question. And then if we don't like the answers to those questions, we can say no to them. questions, to Bree's point. Let's answer a couple questions. And then before we go, I want to make sure too, just as a quick logistical note, I know you both have some events coming up. I know there's some things going on. So make sure you shout out anything you want to shout out as we get towards the end of this, because where in my head, where you all go from an industry perspective and where you spend your time are also things that we should be considering, because you're there and we like you. Bree, what do we have for questions first? We have a lot. A quality mark for fail safes. I'm going to go through the questions here, and if you see one you want, feel free to take it. A quality mark for AI models.
I would just say, Mr. Jesse, amazing Mr. Jesse, asked a couple questions in the chat about sort of very specific legal questions about his situation. Unfortunately, this is not a forum where we can do that, Jesse, but I'd be happy to chat with you offline in a little more detail. The risk is I don't want to give you advice that somebody else hears and then takes it and uses it in a way that doesn't serve them. So anything you hear on the show from me that sounds like legal advice, just, you got to do your own. You got to hire your own lawyer or get your own advice from someone who owes you an ethical duty to provide the advice after doing the proper research and examination of the particular facts of things. That said, you're asking the right questions, so thank you for that, and I'll leave that there.
Fun one. Oh yeah, we forgot to do that. I think we were supposed to disclaimer that we are not here to be anybody's, even LegalZoom.com, which I use. I call them and their name is LegalZoom, and the first thing on the recording is, we cannot provide legal advice. Please consult your lawyer. And I'm like, but it's in your name.
But it's in your name.
We all look like we're doing legal work, but in fact, that's an area where the AIs are really going to get involved. That's interesting that you brought that up. I haven't even thought about how that can really improve the output and those things.
Like templates?
Well, but it becomes more than templates, where if the machine can ask the right questions and based on the answers to the first round, expand on and get the second round and the third round, the machine can make a lot better decisions about what goes into the document. So it no longer becomes a fixed standardized template, and it becomes a much more customized, bespoke agreement. Now, whether the machine does it right is always going to be the question. And I'll tell you my own experience is I have plenty of people come to me to fix things that LegalZoom set up for them. So maybe that part of my business will go away over time as AI comes into things.
Or paralegals will.
Yeah.
Any take on the social media side of things? Do you all spend a lot of time with social media? I don't personally anymore spend a ton of time outside of business with social media. So I always look at, like, an accountability factor. I look at mostly on the poster of things as much as I would any mechanisms they use. But any thoughts on, like, the accountability with social media specifically?
I have to spend time on social because it's my job. And not that it's fun. Personally, I don't. I've really tried to step back. It's a fine line. We can have that discussion at some point, another time. But in terms of it being my job, I am in it all the time, looking at things, seeing, posting, being very aware of algorithms, recognizing what's working, what's not working. So it's very much centric on a business perspective. And I think what is very frustrating from, I believe now, from the biggest company to the smallest creator, is that everybody is vying for visibility, and algorithms change all the time. And we are relying so heavily on eyes seeing what we're up to. That direct to consumer connection is not quite as there as it used to be. That said, I'm not sure how that aligns with AI. Like, I'm not quite sure. Those algorithms obviously are coded in there, and they change all the time. But it really sucks that you build something around something that you feel and then the platform changes the way that it worked, and therefore you have to start over. And that is it's so frustrating from so many different perspectives, and I have felt that personally as I've seen it affect creators, and I've also seen larger companies go through the same exact thing, and everybody's just trying to figure out what's happening here and realigning themselves. So that's what I see in terms of social at this point.
It's so interesting to say that about the changing of the algorithms and the changing of how it operates, and they're doing it deliberately. They're doing it on purpose to keep you coming back and doing things again, and so on, because this is how these companies make their money, by keeping you on the platform. So on the one hand, they're building in things that give you that dopamine hit, that reward reaction. But they're also, I mean, I don't know if you've done any computer coding, but you try it and something doesn't work, and you try it again and you fix this and that other thing breaks and so on. That is what they're doing. Some of it maybe unintentionally, but some of it is very deliberate, because they know you're going to come back and fix it and make it work. We get result oriented in our head, and we're trying to make it happen the way we see it happening in our mind's eye. And so they're always kind of steering us down a different pathway and moving the goalposts on us, which is, but it's important. Again, information media literacy is to know that that's what's going on and use our social wisely. And so to answer the original question, do I use social? Yes, I use social media. I use it a lot. I don't think nowadays you can be an independent business person and not be on social. But, I try to pick and choose what I'm doing and which platforms. I'm just not going to do a lot of TikTok because life's too short in my view. But I'll do Facebook and LinkedIn and a little bit of Twitter and YouTube.
Yep.
So it's on the menu.
I feel the same. I engage with it for business. Really the only one I do for my own entertainment anymore is LinkedIn. I find it more fun than the others. Honestly, I engage with all of them. I try to take a floater, because I think it's important to understand what's going on in the business world, and I know it's important to have a presence there. But yeah, I like to manipulate the algorithm back. But again, as you said, Elsie, story for a different day. It's fun to at least think that we understand it once in a while. It's probably all just for our benefit to think that. But that does lead kind of where we ended with social media on a good note, because next week the plan is, I think, misrepresentation. So getting into a little bit more of that, I think is a really good connection point about what you were talking about with filters, Elsie, and Gordon, what you were talking about with having that little brand stamp on tying things backwards. Because the misrepresentation happens when we necessarily maybe don't know what's behind. Again, like behind the curtains. We know behind the curtains. So I think it'll be a fun tie-in. I think that it'll have a lot of relevance to a lot of creators, whether it be a podcaster or a social media person, because where is the line between doing our best and misrepresenting what is real? There's all sorts of fun places to jump in like that. I think we'll have more questions. We had a couple questions we didn't quite get to today that were in the hopper, but that's okay. We spent some time digging in a little deeper and getting the feel for things today. I'm really grateful. I want to get close to wrap. I want to give you both a chance to have any parting words, to share anything that you need to get into the universe, and of course to let people know where to follow you. You both mentioned a couple of platforms that are best to find you at, but certainly if people want to engage with the discussion after the discussion, if you didn't catch it in today's episode, that is what we're looking for. We're looking for everybody to get involved and engage with the conversation, whether it be with us or the people around you. But if you need a starting point, let it be with Gordon and Elsie. Be a part of their world. Watch what they watch. They are industry minds. And if you have a question, they might be able to get you the answer. So I think they're really, really good people to connect with and to follow, because the podcast industry is one of the most respectful industries to creators that exists, in my opinion. And so I think for that reason, it makes sense for us to follow your examples. I really, really appreciate you both being here on this topic. I'm looking forward to misrepresentation next week. Looking forward to any guests we might have stop by along the way. But it's been a lovely premiere as far as I'm concerned, but I'd like to pass it to you, Elsie and Gordon. Gordon, you want the last word? You want the next word?
Let's let Elsie have the last word, since I just love the sound of my voice so much. I overdid it on this one. So if you want to find me, follow me on socials. My handle is GFiremark almost everywhere. And you can find me on the web at thepodcastlawyer.com, thepodcastlawyer.com, or gordonfiremark.com. And the scroll bar in the chat already had the thing about my legal fundamentals webinar that comes up later in March. I'm going to be at Podcast Movement Evolutions in late March also. Is late March, early March, and anyway, I'll be there, and really looking forward to moderating a panel of legal eagle experts on this stuff. So yeah, it's gonna be fun there. Elsie, are you gonna be at Podcast Movement too?
I am not. I'm not going to Evolutions this year. No.
Okay, well, the Libsyn group is always a little, a little different every time. But okay, well, what about you, Elsie?
You can find me at the Elsie Escobar almost everywhere on social. And I'm there periodically here and there. I'll pop in. I'm going to be doing a webinar next week, depending upon when you see it. It's going to be happening on February 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. Pacific. And it is called the No Pod Fade Guarantee in 2023. So I am partnering with Bethany Hawkins, who is another really fantastic wise soul in the podcasting industry. And we are going to be addressing yet another question that happens, obviously, for us in terms of the pod fade, which just means that you just stop making podcasts. Usually they're due to, family things, life things. It's much harder than you think it is, workflow problems. And we're going to try to address all of that from a lot of different perspectives, including what if you do need to pod fade, and just giving you like a conscious decoupling so that you can just go about your business, move forward. It's all right. No shame. Sometimes you just got to let it go. So that's happening next week. And also always we have ShePodcasts live in June. If anybody wants to attend a conference that is centering women and other marginalized genders, please attend. That is in June. And you can find that, I believe, at ShePodcastsLive.com. I don't even know exactly the URL to that, but check that out for sure.
Excellent. Thank you both. We will definitely be following those things. I'm excited, like I said, for misrepresentation next week. On behalf of Bree and the NumoSpect team, thank you so much, everybody, for being in the comments and being so engaging. I think like the conversation, the comments was so reassuring and so exciting for our first go with this. And I'm just without words with gratitude for this moment and to have this cool conversation and to be a part of it with both of you. Thank you so much, Gordon. Thank you so much, Elsie. Bree, whenever you're ready, get ready to hit the button. But thank you so much to everybody for being here. And as always, I almost forgot. Thank you to my moms and my dad. Don't get to be here without those people.
Right on.
Right on.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, look at that.
I love it.
AI.
Cool.